It came out of Augustine, actually, who got it out of the Bible, basically. But Augustine, in about the 400s AD, sort of systematized it. And he said, a just war had to have certain characteristics. And off the top of my head, it had to be for the right cause. It had to be a last resort. It had to be to restore peace. You don't want to go to war for illegitimate reasons. You want to restore peace. That's the goal of war. It had to be proportional. You don't drop a nuke on somebody that just, did something very small to your country. You try and proportionally respond.
Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demas. Uncommon sense in current times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm so excited to be here today with Dr. Frank Turek. I have listened to him and his podcast, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, for many years now with my children and learned a whole lot from him. He's an apologist, an author, speaker, best known for his book with Norm Geisler, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and his works on crossexamine.org. He's a former Navy aviator. He's debated leading atheist. He hosts a weekly TV and radio show. He speaks about the country, including college campuses, on faith, culture, and truth. And although he is an amazing voice for Christians, his disdain for the Dallas Cowboys, though, is proof that all men are sinners and fall short of the glory of God. So Frank, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, Peter, being from New Jersey, we have a saying, whenever the Cowboys win, it's living proof that Satan is alive and well.
So I think being from New Jersey just says it all right
That's
there.
Right.
So.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. We have nothing to brag about recently. In fact, neither of our franchises do we?
No, not at all.
It's those Philadelphia Eagles now that are the cream of the crop in that division. Anyway.
So I was listening to your podcast at Memorial Day, and you were talking about just war theory, and we obviously have what's going on with Iran and Israel, and then we our involvement in it. And I remember talking with a young pastor who said, he can never be a politician because they have to send people to war, and Christians can't do that. So I wanted to ask you that question. So what is just war? What is that theory, and what are its defining traits? How do we know about it?
It came out of Augustine, actually, who got it out of the Bible, basically. But Augustine, in about the 400s AD, sort of systematized it. And he said, a just war had to have certain characteristics. And off the top of my head, it had to be for the right cause. It had to be a last resort. It had to be to restore peace. You don't want to go to war for illegitimate reasons. You want to restore peace. That's the goal of war. It had to be proportional. You don't drop a nuke on somebody that just, did something very small to your country. You try and proportionally respond. And this just makes sense in light of Romans 13 and also Genesis 9, because the purpose of government is to protect innocent people from evil, to punish wrongdoers. And for people who think that Christians are required to be pacifist, number one, they haven't read the Bible. Number two, they don't understand that in a fallen world, God has put into place an institution to protect innocent people from evil, and that's government. In fact, God has established three organizations, or I should say three institutions. One is the family. He started with the family, then government, and then finally the church. Government is necessary because, as James Madison put it, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. We wouldn't need a government if we were angels, but we need a government because we're not angels. And there are times that force is going to be necessary to protect innocent people from evil. Now, inside a country, we have police to protect innocent people from evil. Outside of a country, in other words, we have evil coming to attack us from outside the country. We have armies, we have air forces, we have navies, we have Marines, those kind of things. And so it's just an extension of the government's role to protect innocent people from evil. But using force has to be done rightly and advisedly. You can't say that no force is going to be necessary at any time. I mean, for people who say to me, well, war is never justified. First of all, God had holy wars in the Old Testament. Secondly, in the New Testament, God doesn't tell people to get out of the military, right? John the Baptist told a Roman soldier, just do what's right, don't abuse your power. Basically, you got to protect innocent people from evil. And the Bible shows that the leader or the government has the sword for a reason. In fact, when Jesus was before Pilate, Pilate said, don't you know I have the authority to kill you? And Jesus said, you do, but you get that authority from above. So this is all spelled out in the Bible, and Augustine just systematized it.
So one of your arguments that you have is the difference between prescriptive and descriptive. How do we know that this stuff, like with John the Baptist talking to the Roman centurions, is not a descriptive thing instead of a prescriptive part of it? How do we distinguish that when it comes to war?
Well, John the Baptist is just pointing something out that was true, that if you're in a position of authority, you ought not abuse your authority. He didn't tell the Roman centurion, and Jesus didn't tell any Roman centurion or any Roman soldiers, you need to stop being a soldier, right?
Right.
They just said you have to do your job rightfully, ethically, morally, fairly. Don't abuse your power, in other words. So I think that is a prescription to not abuse your power. It's not just a description. I mean, that would make sense with the rest of the scriptures, true, right? You're not supposed to show favoritism. In fact, that's throughout the Old and New Testaments.
Right.
Even when it came to the poor in the Old Testament, God said, don't show the poor favoritism. Don't show the rich man favoritism. Treat people fairly. James says the same thing in his little epistle, where he says, don't treat somebody rich better than somebody poor. Treat people fairly. So I think it's a prescription, not just a description.
So though, when we're looking at that, and you're kind of and you dealing with those traits, some of those traits I don't know if you can determine until after the war is over. Because otherwise I can look at Chamberlain during World War II and say, well, he was trying everything he could, and therefore, and even though he did not recognize the evil of Hitler, that if he was correct, then and we were wrong, but because we won and we got to expose the evil, we can now say it was a just war. But going into it, is it always possible to know it's a just war, or is it more of a we just think we're doing the right thing?
Well, I think if you go by the principles that Augustine laid out, you should know whether or not it's a just war. Now, maybe, hindsight's always 20/20. It's easy to say now that Chamberlain was an appeaser, right? But at the time, it might have been, well, let's give this one last try, right? And Churchill came in and he knew that Hitler was not going to be appeased. He'd already taken Poland, right? He was already being aggressive. So he knew he had to fight Hitler. And if anyone ever tells me that war, there's never an opportunity for a just war, or that no wars can be justified, are you telling me that the war against Hitler was not justified? I mean, how are we supposed to love people if we don't protect them from evil? Right. If you have the power to protect people from evil, if you have the power to protect the Jews from a murderous anti-Semite who wants to round them all up and murder them, and we have the power to prevent that, how are we loving them if we don't use that power?
So with all wars, at least modern wars, I mean, there's been a lot of corruption behind it. There are people that have taken advantage of it. I mean, and that's just the nature of humans.
Yes.
So though, does that taint the idea of just war, because certain people may be doing it for the wrong reason while other people may be doing it for the correct reason? Does that taint the idea of just war?
No, because just because somebody does something illicitly doesn't mean it can't be done correctly.
Right. Say that again. Say that for me one more time.
Just because someone does something wrongly doesn't mean something can't be done correctly.
Okay.
Right? Sure. Right. You could do anything wrongly, but that would not be an argument against doing it rightly. You can love people wrongly, right? You can enable people. You think you're loving them, but you're not. You're enabling them to do evil. And your intention is to love them. Well, just because some people love wrongly doesn't mean there isn't a way to love people rightly. So, and by the way, it's been put this way too, that you don't judge a philosophy by its abuse. You judge it by its proper use. So
Okay.
if somebody does something wrongly, say they engage in war illicitly, doesn't mean that engaging in war can't be done rightly. Bad
I got you.
examples
Yes.
just show you how not to do it.
Right.
That's all.
So, does this apply to individuals, though? I mean, does this idea of just war apply to an individual that can try to do something on their own? Take Harper's Ferry, for example. What he attempted to do was obviously for the right reason. It was more of a rebellion than anything else. Does it apply in this situation, or is that a whole separate theoretical or theological?
Are you talking about sort of vigilanteism? Is that what you mean?
I don't know if it's that, but when I think about like Bonhoeffer, I mean, obviously Bonhoeffer is an amazing, hero of the faith, but in reality he was a part of a conspiracy to assassinate somebody who was evil. But that wouldn't fall under just war, but that doesn't also fall under turn the other cheek and forgiveness either. So there seems to be some kind of gray area when it comes to individuals, not in vigilante, but like I said, like when Harriet Tubman, and freeing the slaves, a lot of stuff. All those situations, they were doing things for the right reason. They were doing things because they felt God led them that way. But it doesn't seem like that applies to the just war theory.
Yeah, well, there's a role for civil disobedience. And you're supposed to obey government unless government either forces you to do something God tells you not to do or tries to prevent you from doing something God tells you ought to do. Those are the roles of civil disobedience, or the justifications or the carve-outs for them. The problem is that you have to take the consequences of that. So if you are, say, civilly disobeying the government and you're freeing slaves and the government tells you not to, you're going to obey God rather than men, but you're also then going to have to face the consequences of a government that may wrongly persecute you for that.
I always say the problem is when God tells us to do something that would enable us to be civil disobedient, He doesn't tell our family and friends. So we always seem like we look like we're out on an island when we want to engage like that.
There are several places in the scriptures where people disobeyed government to obey God. I mean, you can go back to the Hebrew midwives. You can go back to Rahab. You can go back to the apostles who, when they're told don't preach the gospel anymore, they say we must obey God rather than men, right?
Right.
So when you do that, however, you're going to take the consequences with it, but you're not going to contradict what God tells you to do in order to obey what government tells you to do.
So in a situation of rebellion, and you take the American Revolution as just as a good example there. Again, that was an armed conflict. I would argue that would qualify as a just war. We could see the consequences of it seems to support it as well. But other people, especially during that time, there was obviously a lot of pastors that were loyal to the British Crown who would say that what they were doing was incorrect. They preached against it.
Yes. And in fact, my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a book on Christian ethics. And in that section on just war, he personally believes that the American Revolution was unjustified.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because they were not a legitimate government. Just war is supposed to take place between a legitimate government and another legitimate government. And so he would argue that they should have been like Canada. They should have just gotten their independence peacefully. It would have taken a lot longer. Others will say, no, it was just because technically the Americans were not trying to overthrow King George. They were just trying to kick him out of this land. They didn't want to go over to the UK and say, okay, now we're taking over the UK. They just wanted to say, we want to govern ourselves here. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, what it's all about is that King George is unjustly governing the colonies here. And that's why they say in the Declaration of Independence, we submit these facts to a candid world and the supreme judge of the universe. And we pledge our lives, our honor, and our sacred how do they put it? We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And we think the supreme judge of the world agrees with us. So there's a dispute even among Christians as to whether or not the American Revolution was justified.
I have not heard that before. I think it's interesting because especially when I think about what is it the Magdeburg Confession, where they advocated for armed resistance. I think it was during the time of Martin Luther. They advocated it. Because but does that count as proper authority in that particular situation? Did you know that sitting all day can significantly impact blood circulation? I mean, look up, there's a ton of research on it. Your leg and calf muscles help pump blood back to your heart. So when you sit, blood pools in your legs. And further studies show that sitting decreases nitric oxide production, making vessels less able to expand. This is why, like in the afternoons, or if you've been sitting for a long time, you start noticing low energy, brain fog, or just kind of feeling a step slower. It might be creeping in on you after a while. And a lot of that could be linked to your circulation. So Juvedon has created Blood Flow 7. It is designed to support healthy nitric oxide levels, which helps your blood vessels relax, open up, improving oxygen and nutrient delivery to your brain, heart, and muscles. That means better stamina, mental clarity, and overall vitality without caffeine or stimulants. It's made with clinically studied natural ingredients, and in research, these have been shown to boost nitric oxide by as much as 230% in just a few hours. It helps open arteries for smoother blood flow. So there's just 2 easy capsules a day. There's no mess, no fuss, and you're supporting your heart health, your healthy blood pressure, and more energy to power through the day. So check it out at bloodflow7, that's the number 7.com/uncommon, or you can click the link in the description. That's bloodflow number 7, so bloodflow7.com/uncommon. It is just common sense.
Yeah, you got to look at all the facts and try and discover that. And it may be murky. There may be periods you're not quite sure. But for an individual to try, and in fact, Bonhoeffer never answered the question. When they asked Bonhoeffer, is it right to try and assassinate Hitler? He wouldn't answer the question.
So is that an ends that justifies the means type argument?
That what?
That we kind of have to wait until the end to make that determination, because it's kind of murky, and we can only really make the determination of it, that whether it was the right thing to do or not.
Again, I think every one of these situations has to be evaluated on a case by case basis. And just because some situations are murky doesn't mean other situations are clear. Like, for example, I think obviously World War II was a clear, just war that the Allies had to respond to the Nazi aggression. They had to do it. There was no other option. They tried to come to a peaceful solution with Hitler, and he'd have none of it. What's the only other option? If somebody comes into your house and you try and prevent them from doing so, but they're intent on coming into your house and harming your family, what's your only option?
Right.
Yeah, you don't have an option. Right. In other words, that's the last resort. War is the last resort. And I think it's true even with Iran and Israel, because when jihadists tell you they want to murder you, they mean it. Okay? It's been going on for 1,400 years. And when they continue to violate their previous agreements about nuclear weapons, is there really any other choice? Do we have to wait for a nuke to go off? Or are we safer saying, even though we don't maybe have all the facts, we know they're trying to get a nuclear weapon, it's safer to bomb a few facilities than to find out later they got the nuke and they used it?
So in that context, and although I agree completely with you, but in that context, is there a difference between just war and holy war? I mean, we talk about holy wars in the Old Testament, but is there a difference in that context of it? Because Iran is claiming they have the right because of a holy war. Yeah,
well, their source of holy war is false. There's no such being as Allah. Okay. Yes. The Quran is false. In fact, I'm about to have Jay Smith on my podcast here coming up shortly, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. And Jay puts out this brilliant case that the sources for Islam are so far after Muhammad that it's very, very unlikely that the Quran and the things that are said of Muhammad are actually historical. that much of it has just been made up. Unlike the New Testament, which we have eyewitness testimony that goes right back to the events itself. In fact, even one of their great apologists, D. who died several decades ago, but D. pointed out when a Christian apologist was arguing with him, in fact, I think it was Josh McDowell, he said, why do you guys trust the Quran about what happened to Jesus when the Quran is 600 years after Jesus? You know, the Quran says Jesus never died or rose from the dead. Right. Of course, the Bible says he did die and rise from the dead. And you know what D. said? He said the Christians are right. He basically said, yeah, the Quran is too late, but then he went on to try and attack the Bible anyway, even though the Quran elsewhere says you ought to obey the Bible. So that's something called the Quranic dilemma, because on one hand, the Quran says don't obey, or on one hand, the Quran says obey the Bible. On the other hand, the Quran disagrees with the Bible. So look, if the Bible's false, the Quran is still false because it tells you to obey a book that's false. If the Bible's true, the Quran is false as well because it disagrees with what's true. So it's called the Quranic dilemma.
But is there a thing for a Christian holy war then outside of the Old Testament?
No, unless God gives us new revelation.
Gotcha.
Right? So, and there's no new revelation now. The revelation we have comes from the New Testament in terms of Christianity. And of course, we believe the Old Testament as well, but there are certain things in the Old Testament that no longer apply, like the Old Testament civil laws and the Old Testament ceremonial laws and the dietary laws. I mean, that's all Old Covenant stuff. But the New Covenant there's no new revelation where God shows up and says, okay, you got a holy war here. You got to go do this. The Quran, on the other hand, has never rescinded the holy war that is talked about in Surah 8 and Surah 9 and some other surahs throughout the Quran. There's 114 chapters in the Quran. Surah is a chapter. So the Quran has holy war going on forever, whereas the Bible had certain things in the Old Testament that were temporary judgments on people in the land who were committing atrocities.
So in this situation, obviously, we don't have that, but we do have this concept of just war. Mm-hmm. Can a war start out just and end up unjust?
Yeah, of course it can. If you violate some of the principles, if you say respond disproportionately, or you're not trying to reestablish peace. I mean, look what's going on over there in Ukraine and Russia.
Right.
You know, it's a complicated situation, but Russia is obviously the aggressor there, and they've been trying to negotiate peace forever, and it looks like neither side wants it. Right.
Right.
I mean, isn't the goal to restore peace of a conflict? I mean, both sides are going to have to give up something for that to resolve. And if Russia thinks annexing all of Ukraine is the only solution, that war is never going to end.
Right. But if we're talking about something that is proportionate, and I do think Ukraine's an interesting topic to go back to, but if we're talking about that, there are people I know that argue that the nuclear proliferation that happened in World War II, what we did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was that led it and moved it from being a just war to an unjust war. I can argue both directions on that. What's your opinion on that part of it?
In Japan, they had a saying that when something like 89 million dead, we're never going to surrender, right? And in fact, Hiro Onada, who was a holdout on Lubang Island in the Philippines, did not surrender as a Japanese soldier until 1974.
Wow, did not know that.
Now, why did he do that? Despite being dropped newspapers from Japan into the Lubang Island jungle saying the war is over, he thought they were all propaganda because he knew that 89 or 90 million dead was on the lips of every Japanese citizen. We would never surrender. So either everybody's dead in Japan or the war is still going on. And he couldn't believe that everybody's dead in Japan, so the war still must be going on. So he did not surrender until March of 1974, when his own commanding officer, who the Japanese had to pull out of his book selling job 29 years after the war, and had to bring him to Lubang Island to find Onada in the jungle and to relieve him of his duties because he was not going to surrender until his own commanding officer told him to stand down. So what was Harry Truman's options? To kill 89 million Japanese or to try and break them with the new weapon?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. Then carrying that forward to Ukraine and Russia, though, I mean, this conflict is different than most. I mean, and it's interesting when I think about the difference between here and World War II is the same distance in years between World War II and the Civil War. So obviously technology's changed. There's a whole lot that's happened there. So, but this is a lot of drones, a lot of it's not a lot of when we think of war, a lot of times we think of Saving Private Ryan, and now all of a sudden, it's completely changed. Does the technology on it make that also improportionate? In the sense, and even take it outside of the fact that we agree that this war is just an aggressor and both sides aren't wanting to surrender, but just the technology of it, because obviously that's the future of warfare. Does that make that worse?
No, I actually think the technology makes civilian casualties less likely.
Really?
I don't know if you saw, if it's done properly. Now,
Yes.
Putin may want to take out, civilians. He appears to be attacking civilians. But in the the Israel-Iran conflict, do you know that Israel put a missile into one apartment to take out some nuclear scientists and military leaders? Have you ever seen that picture? There's just a hole going in the side of a skyscraper. They could have taken down the whole skyscraper, the whole apartment complex, and ensured that those guys were dead. But instead of killing civilians, they put a Tomahawk or a similar missile into one apartment. Just to kill the targets, not to mess with the civilians, which is what technology allows you now. You know what Israel does over in Gaza? They text people who are in the area of a building that they know that Hamas is operating out of. Sometimes it's a hospital, sometimes it's a school, a place where they shouldn't be. And they say, you got 45 minutes to get out because we're going to blow this place up. And of course, Hamas gets this. So they sometimes leave too.
Right.
They're going above and beyond the call of duty to ensure that civilians don't get murdered. And you can do that with technology. But there's always going to be collateral damage.
Right.
Sometimes you can't avoid collateral damage. But in World War II, we bombed the city of Dresden and killed 25,000 people in one night. We sent 800 sorties, 800 bombers over Dresden in February of 1945. There were 1,000 people in a bomb shelter. They were incinerated.
Wow.
Because we thought the way to win the war was to not just hit military targets, just blow cities up. And we couldn't be precise, right? We couldn't be precise. We didn't have those kind of weapons back then. And even when that happened, a lot of people were saying that was overkill. We shouldn't have done that. Why do you have to kill all these civilians? We seem to have no problem with it in World War II. Now, we seem to think, well, we can't in any way. If any civilian gets killed, the whole war should be called off. Well, that's just not realistic. We try and avoid it now, but we can't guarantee it.
So people want to learn more about just war theory. If they, what resources do you recommend for them on that?
Probably this book would be the best. It's going to cover a lot of topics, but by my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, Christian Ethics. And he's got a ton of issues in here and Geisler was always great at presenting all sides of a topic and then giving what he thinks is the right side. So, in terms of specific issues, he's got abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, biomedical issues, capital punishment, war, civil disobedience, sexual issues, homosexuality, marriage and divorce, ecology, animal rights. Even has appendix on drugs, gambling, pornography, birth control. There's a lot of issues right here in this book. So this would be a good sort of primer, kind of an overview of the topic, of many of these topics.
Well, that sounds good. Well, I appreciate it. And again, I encourage everyone to go back, listen to your podcast that you did on Memorial Day on it. I thought it was obviously very well done, very well thought out as usual. For people to find your podcast, those that may not be familiar with you, and to find your podcast, where can they find your podcast? In your state?
Wherever they get podcasts. But if they go to crossexamine.org, crossexamine with a D on the end of it.org, they'll find it there. But the podcast is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We do 2 of these a week, and they drop on Friday and Tuesday. And they're also on a bunch of radio stations around the country. At least one of them are. But our website has all that on there. By the way, let me say one other thing, Peter, if I can, on this,
please.
that is often overlooked. And that is that when people look at passages like turn the other cheek, I think we often confuse what that means, number one, and who it applies to, number two. Because turn the other cheek dealt with personal insults. You know, if somebody insults you, you don't have to insult them back, okay? You can show the love of Christ to them. In fact, Jesus, when he was actually slapped, he didn't turn the other cheek. That wasn't an insult. That was physical harm.
Right.
And so he said, who slapped me, right? Because he was blindfolded, right? He didn't go, oh, hit me again. Okay. Turn the other cheek doesn't mean that if somebody wants to kill you, you have to let them. And turn the other cheek doesn't apply to governments. Governments are supposed to punish wrongdoers. Governments are supposed to protect innocent people from evil. If the government turned the other cheek or decided that compassion was more important than safety and protection, then evil would rule the country. You can't allow that to happen. Governments can't say, judges can't say, well, out of compassion or turning the other cheek, I'm going to let this murderer go. That's not what that passage is about. The passage that the government is supposed to put into place is what Romans 13 talks about, and that is to protect innocent people from evil, to punish wrongdoers. Governments punish wrongdoers inside the country through police and outside the country through armies, navies, air forces, those kind of things. So it's important to be clear as to who passages are applying to.
And that's true with all the passages of the Bible
right.
as well. So, well, again, I thank you so much for being on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Again, you have been a source of inspiration for me and my family. And so they have used your techniques throughout college, both my daughter and son at different universities. And I greatly appreciate it from a father's perspective. I just have to tell you how much I thank you for it, and I wish you continue with your ministry. And I thank you again for all you're doing.
Thank you, Peter. And I look forward to seeing you at our training coming up, the Cross-Examine Instructor Academy, here at the end of the month.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless.
Bless you.